Welcome to our Toronto Real Estate Podcast, where we tackle the big questions facing business owners, investors, and consumers alike. In this episode, we're diving into how to thrive amid economic downturns, fear, and uncertainty. Joined by a renowned business coach, Jim Crisafulli, we explore key mindset shifts necessary for navigating these challenging times. We'll cover strategies for maintaining a positive outlook during periods of maximum pessimism, identifying opportunities, and adapting to challenges like inflation and rising interest rates for business owners, entrepreneurs, homeowners, and those looking to enter the Toronto real estate market. Join us for a session of practical advice and inspiring stories designed to empower you and your business. We are delighted to have Jim Crisafulli, a seasoned expert in guiding small business owners towards creating businesses that thrive independently. Jim's philosophy is grounded in the core tenet of E-Myth: work on it, not just in it. He specializes in identifying blind spots, overcoming self-limiting beliefs, and offering time management advice to ensure business owners focus on the right things in the right order. With over 40 years of personal entrepreneurial experience and many business challenges, Jim deeply understands small business owners' frustrations and hurdles. His extensive background includes starting his own small business consulting company in 1996, and he has been an invaluable counselor, trainer, program manager, and strategic plan facilitator for the Rhode Island Small Business Development Center since 1995. Jim has been an E-Myth certified business coach since 2012 and holds both a BS and MBA in business admin from Bryant University. Jim has helped hundreds of businesses flourish over the past 25 years. We are honored to have Jim here today to share his knowledge and expertise. I'll be one of your moderators today, Kori Marin, broker and co-founder of Fox Marin, and also with us today, Mr. Ralph Fox, our broker of record at Fox Marin. So without further ado, let's dive into a conversation filled with insights and actionable advice. Jim, welcome so much to the podcast today.
Well, Kori, thank you very much. The first thought after that intro is I am doubling my fees based on that wonderful background of accomplishment. I don't often look at it with those glasses, but I appreciate the very kind words and the choice of words of seasoned rather than senior person. So thank you very much for that very kind introduction.
Our absolute pleasure. And it's so interesting to hear other people read your bio and you're like, oh, I've actually done okay for myself when you hear it coming from somebody else. So we are just so grateful to have you here today. We know, we all go way back together with you working with us at Fox Marin over the years. And it's an honor to have you here. And we're just excited to dive into the conversation today. So I am going to pass the baton to Mr. Fox over here, who will lead us off in our chat.
Thank you, Kori. Jim, I'd just like to reiterate what Kori said, how happy we are to have you here. We were thinking about what would be an interesting topic for today's podcast, for this week's podcast. And we were just thinking about a lot of the conversations we're having with clients, prospective clients, and our team and ourselves and our family members. And right now, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty about where things are heading and where things are at. Currently, we are entering into a recession here in Canada with GDP and GDP per capita contracting. We have interest rates at very elevated numbers right now, and it's probably going to stay that way for at least the short term. Inflation is really sticky. We've got a war going on, two wars actually, one in Europe, one in the Middle East. And we've got a real problem here at home with our government and our leadership, and there's a lot of decisiveness going on. And so we're in this environment right now where there's a tremendous amount of negativity, really being focused on the real estate market. Lots of inventory is piling up right now. Sales are anemic. Buyer sentiment is low. The media is completely negative. And so, in these type of environments, people either tend to go into fight or flight or freeze. And we're seeing a lot of people freeze and we're seeing a lot of people go into flight. And we always have to remind ourselves that there is a third option and that there are always opportunities. And sometimes opportunities are at their greatest when things are at their worst. So how do we think about that? And how do we use that to shape our viewpoint on our lives, on the Toronto real estate market and on the economy is something that is just a continual conversation. And we thought, who better than to bring in somebody who has been a friend, a mentor, somebody who's always been there for us as we've evolved as a company and as a business and as human beings than you. So we're so glad to have you here. And this is something we'd really, really love to have the opportunity to discuss with you. So in light of what I just said, does anything sort of resonate with you and what you're seeing with your clients and how you are thinking about things or guiding your friends, your family, your clients in this current environment?
Certainly, based on your sharing of what's going on in the world around us, of course, it's very easy to be pessimistic, and not easy. I shouldn't say that. It's human nature, to be down about it. Of course, the wars, the government, the inflation. Now, granted, I'm here in the States and not experiencing the economic recession. It's been discussed on and off for the last year and a half, but I think the jury's out that we're probably going to get past it. So your situation up in Canada is probably a little bit worse economically, but of course we all share the world problems. And, sometimes it's a matter of deciding whether or not you want to. Honestly, I feel terrible sometimes when so many people are focused on that news and it eats them alive. So oftentimes I'm like, maybe you might be better off turning it off for a little while and, try to stay away from that noise and use that same time and energy towards more positive things, which are, certainly I think we can always depend on, the past historical trends to get you through it. Again, based on my number of years, both as a business person and as an individual. I know I haven't shared much of that with you over the years, but back in 1982, the interest rates here, when I bought my first house in 1982, interest rates were 19%. That's what the banks were advertising, like to get business. They would put newspaper ads, like it was something special. So, talk about weathering a few storms. This was back coming out of the Carter administration, and it was a real tough time. And guess what? It came back down. The economy improved. We've had a couple of dips along the way. Then, of course, 2008 was a bigger bump to get over. Stock market, I don't want to say crash, but felt like it. And guess what? It all came back. So, I know it's hard to say, well, that's what always happened and it's going to happen again. But I personally do believe, that it's going to turn around. Here in the States, I think we feel like we've got inflation under control. Feels that way. What the government did with interest rates wasn't probably the most popular choice, but it seems to have worked. And I think we've probably stabilized that interest rate now here. So it is challenging. I've got children. Actually, it was ironic this past weekend. My youngest and I were talking about finance and interest rates. And the son of a gun, he's 32 years old, and he's got 2.87 on a condo that he used to live in, and now he rents out. And then his personal residence up in Portland, Maine, is also like at 2.75.
Wow.
And
if I can interject, what are the terms on those two mortgages?
Oh yeah, well, as you know, here in the States, we don't do this baloney of every 5 years. The home mortgage up in Maine is 30 years fixed.
Oh, God bless.
Isn't it amazing?
That. Yeah.
And even myself, I moved residence a few years ago, and I had a little gap to fill. So I chose to take 10 years, but I could have gone 20, 30, whatever I wanted. And it's at 3%, and I'm in no hurry to pay it off. However, fast forward, that was about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Now I've got another son who lives in New York on Long Island, and he's probably 5.5 or 6. So the difference between the two of them, maybe with the same balance, is probably $1,200, $1,300 a month difference for the same amount of principal. It's really, and of course, since then, it's even gone higher. So individually, it's certainly challenging for the younger generation, I think, to deal with this, especially when they caught wind of, the tail end of that flight at the high 2s and the low 3s.
It was so funny. I was just at this conference in the States, and I often find when I'm around Americans, they don't know a lot about Canadian politics or economics or anything like that, or the geography very well, but they seem to all be asking me about the fixed rate and the term on our mortgages. And like, is it true that you guys have a 5-year fixed? And I was like, yes. And they were like, what? Like, it was like the topic of all of my lunches was just about our interest rates and these terms. And I thought it was so interesting that that was a standout piece of information about living in Canada versus anything else. And, I've been asked some pretty crazy questions about living here in the past, but that one seemed to be something that was resonating with everyone. And some people thought couldn't even be true. I was like, no, it's true.
Yeah. But I can understand it when you think about this bank who has now committed to 30 years at this rate. I mean, they really need to have some financial wizards in there in their bank to figure out how to make that work, right? On the individual, residential side, of course, we saw, a boom here in the States, like you guys did with, prices spiking and inventory reducing. And it really was a bubble that really didn't last as very long. We're out of that now. The market is, definitely got more inventory. The number of sales have certainly been, reduced quite a bit, and average prices have started to creep back down.
And the other thing, just quickly, just to touch on real estate, is there's just been a massive migration of where people want to live in the States as well, moving themselves out of the big city centers and moving to perhaps more liberal states or cities that have differentiating points of view on politics. And there's been a big exodus out of New York and a big exodus out of LA. And then we're seeing hot spots like Texas, like Austin being like a big new hub now, and Florida as well. And there just seems to be a migration of where people want to live and thrive and boom, and where they want to move their money as well, which is sort of interesting to see.
Well, of course, a lot of that dovetailed off of post-COVID. Yes. Which, COVID created this thing called work at home. So, one of the many reasons that folks are migrating, of course, is the fact that they can now. They can work in Texas, even though their job is headquartered in LA. Mm-hmm. So that was really obviously a huge part of that. But yeah, a lot of the smaller cities or rural areas are certainly, seeing a lot more folks, coming in, which is nice. But creates new challenges, right? Of, schools and government and taxes and all that other
fun stuff
with it.
I think one of the things you said that was really interesting is tuning out all of the negative noise. Like, one of the things that is like basically a megaphone for negativity is social media. And doing what Kori and I do for a living. It's something that we have to be on. And one of the interesting things we started doing, and this was actually Kori's initiative, but we have 2 separate phones, and we have a social media phone, and we keep that locked in a drawer, and it only comes out when we need it or when we want to refer to it, as opposed to just constantly having this addictive, negative dopamine hit all the time in front of us. Because, you've heard the term doom scrolling. If you don't have some type of a base separation of that and to protect your mindset from that, it can really send you in a negative spiral. And I've seen people that I know recently actually losing their minds and becoming so absorbed with what's happening in the world. Maybe in conjunction with that, they have a little too much time on their hands, and they just end up becoming all consumed in this negativity. And so it really struck me when you said, just try to cut that out and go about your day and think about the things that you can control versus all of the negative things that you can't, I think is really great advice. Do you see that, or have you seen that over the years with your clients? And is that part of what you talk to people about?
I'm glad you brought that up, particularly the social media aspect. I can't speak for everyone in my generation, but, when I speak for myself, that's not something that exists for the most part in my world. I may check the national news on NBC, for example, a couple of times a day just to make sure that the world hasn't, fallen off the cliff and nobody told me about it. But otherwise, I just want to check to make sure there's nothing major going on. But I'm not in that social media what I call black hole, but I can certainly see the generations, below it, that are again, it's very easy to be addicted to it. And it's very challenging. I mean, I have advised folks, to put the screens away, to turn it off, both individuals and then businesses, that not only the business owners, but their team. It's hard today to say, turn the phone off when folks are used to getting potentially, a family issue. But back in my generation, if there was a certain emergency with your family, you picked up the phone and you called the office and said, I need to speak to my dad or my mom or whatever. So, the distractions, even if you have the phone off, you're still distracted by that light that shines.
Right there. Yeah.
I don't know how people really, honestly, I really do think it impacts productivity in a very bad way. And then on top of it, it's negative stuff that they're looking at, on top of just being, distracted in the first place. So, I think your point, Ralph, of being able to control what you can control, and we can't control the war in the Middle East. We can't control, I hate to say it, of course, we have many more mass killings here in the States, and that's horrible. But I can't get stuck on it. I have to move past it and really spend my time on whatever it is I'm trying to do to grow my business and be a better person and enjoy my life. Otherwise, it's not a good thing. And I know it's easier said than done. I really do.
For sure.
One thing I found really helpful outside of the secondary phone too is when we're working on a specific project is I make sure that all of my notifications are turned off. And then I use my phone that's the non-social media phone as a timer and say, I want to complete this presentation proposal within the next hour. And I put the timer out in front of me and I'm not permitting myself to check text messages or emails in that 1 hour period. And almost every single time I can meet the deadline that I give myself, as long as I'm strictly focused on that one task versus dabbling a little in my text and a little in my email, then checking LinkedIn and then going back. And I just find that if I'm working that way, A, I'm not as productive, obviously. And B, it's just not enjoyable to be jabbed like that, left, right, and center, and kind of just being on the defensive to everything that's coming in. And I'm like, no one needs a response within 15 seconds. They can wait. Like they really can wait. And when I go to do my workout, I don't bring my phone onto the gym floor. I'm like, it's just 1 hour. No one's going to die if I don't respond to their message, unless we're in the middle of like a live deal, we'll call it. That would probably be the only time that I feel like that was a necessity. Otherwise, people are going to be just fine if they don't get a response in 5 minutes.
Again, to your point, and we've talked about it back in the day, was managing your time, right?
Yes.
And that remains to be, in the top 1 or 2 challenges for business owners, business leaders, and I imagine even for, individuals, is managing time. It's just a huge issue. And, that practice of either using a timer or saying, again, however long we're together this morning, nothing's buzzing around me. I'm enjoying the moment. And I think that's another point, is these distractions take away from enjoying the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say it, even photos. I'm not a big photo guy on my phone, but sometimes I see folks that are in these beautiful areas and all they're doing is taking photos,
Yes.
which is nice. But I'm like, are you really enjoying the moment of where you are? So yeah, I think your point, Kori, is about managing time properly, and of course that can be extended. Hey, I understand we need to check our phones and check social media and check messages, but again, I'm not an advocate of 24/7 for sure. I think you guys know that.
Absolutely, and I think time management and focus are 2 things we've touched upon, and they're really, really important to having a successful, productive, insane life. Easier said than done. Let's talk about crises. And there's a really good quote by Winston Churchill, something to the effect of, never let a good crisis go to waste. And definitely there's a lot of crises going on in the world. And like, what is your perspective both personal and as a business coach or client, consultant, working through these type of difficult times and how you perceive them in terms of opportunities or, going back to that fight or flight sort of, or freeze stereotype.
I love that Winston Churchill quote. I can't use a similar world leader for something I heard somebody say, and it may not have been by a famous person, but it was about a recession, and they were basically saying, "I refuse to participate in this recession. I refuse to participate." So everyone around him or her was, "Woe is me," right? And this person just did the total opposite and was not woe is me. He worked harder to survive. So I think it is a mindset, clearly a mindset, and clearly very difficult to get in that mindset. But Churchill's point is again well taken, because historically, I mean, I'd have to think of if I have some examples of clients I've worked with, but I know from my business background and even academically, when I was studying in business school, there were many case studies of companies that would flourish. And to some degree, it's kind of a bit of a sad commentary, not taking advantage, leveraging the unfortunate aspect that you can't control, that some businesses may go bankrupt or some people may go bankrupt. And that's out of your control. But what is in your control is to look at it as an opportunity and not get caught up in the emotion of, geez, I feel bad that company closed up shop and is out of business. Well, that's unfortunate. You didn't have anything to do with it, but maybe I should reach out to that person or whatever and see if there's anything that would be an opportunity for me, and maybe even help that person a little bit by buying their customer base or taking their domain name or whatever. The big picture is, unfortunately, bad things happen to good people, but it doesn't mean that you have to get caught up in the emotion of that, but rather look at it and say, maybe we look at companies that have gone out of business and see what's still left there, maybe to salvage. So that's been my experience. Certainly another one is being a good steward of your business and your personal financials during good times. I remember back in 2008, I was working with a small photographer in Boston, commercial photographer. The guy was a great saver. If you lined up 5 photographers like him, so he would work for, maybe product-oriented companies. So I know one time he had Reebok as a client. So he'd take photos of sneakers, right? But he got paid a lot of money. But the point was, he didn't spend all that money. So when 2008 hit and a lot of commercial photographers were closing up shop, one of the reasons he survived wasn't innovation or some of these other great things. It was mainly because he had a lot of cash to survive.
Tucked away. Do you feel that people and business owners or independent entrepreneurs use times like this as an easy way to get lazy? Or it's like an easy way to say, see, I can give up now because the world is XYZ. And instead of using it as a way to feel motivated or work harder or buckle down more or innovate, it's a way for them to feel that they're justified to take a step back, to sleep in an extra 2 hours, to watch an extra hour of Netflix. And it almost reinforces behavior, that victim mentality that they've kind of been searching for. Like, I feel like there's a little bit of this attitude, like, see, the world is against me. See, nothing works out for me. See, I told you so. And there's something about that I find to be kind of a through line with a lot of people that we know, whether they're real estate brokers, business owners, or team members in a corporate environment. This is the perfect petri dish to be able to encourage that type of mentality. Is that something that you see with your clientele as well? That folding in perspective?
I understand everything that you're sharing. I would say, thankfully, it's not prevalent, with the folks that I work with, but I can understand it. And I would say, of course, I'm sure there's some of that. Offline for a second is, the old saying of, if you want to be positive, don't hang around with negative people, right? So, I'm for the most part feel like I surround myself with the people that have the same values and positivity that I feel I have. So again, going back to your question, I would think, for me, most of the folks that surround me, whether in business or in personal, are of that same mindset.
Right.
Right. So there's less of what you're suggesting, although I truly believe that there is some percentage of folks that are out there. And that's really unfortunate. But maybe roll back to my comment is I think one way of getting past that is not to hang around or be with folks that are woe is me.
One of the things we've talked about recently, and I came to mind while you were talking earlier, Jim, is you said the companies that do well in these type of downturns are companies that are very tight and on top of their finances, something you've worked a lot with us on over the years, and we continue to improve on that front, and innovate at the same time. And I think that is super important. And that's always forefront of my mind right now is like, what's our bottom line? How are we watching our bottom line? What do we need to adjust? Where are our costs? There are so many companies and small businesses that have no idea where their cash flow is. And all of a sudden they run into a problem that they could have anticipated 2, 3, 4, 6 months in advance and adjusted for. So I think that's really important. And then innovate. When there are these shifts, there's lots of opportunity and gaps that start to open up in the market that can be seized upon. And going back to case studies or business studies, like if you look at most major companies from FedEx to UPS, like all these massive companies all really were founded during economic downtimes. And that really goes back to the idea of that's where the opportunity is. And when you come into our office, we have like this kitchen lunchroom area, and we have this big whiteboard, and I have written in my chicken scratch big bold letters. Nobody can really read it, but people understand because I've told them what it says. But it says, it's very profound to me, and it says, strong markets make weak agents. And the reference being that weak markets make very strong agents. I heard this quote, or I heard someone talking to me actually on the phone, and they've been in this business for a very long time in real estate as a broker. She said to me, you know where the market is? The market is between your ears. Like the market isn't anywhere else. And so, yes, there's lots of supply building up, and yes, there's, not a lot of buyers out there, but wow, isn't that a great time to be a buyer? Like, it's so interesting to me how we did a podcast last week about what a great time to buy because nobody's buying and because there's downward pressure on the market, and people were like mocking us in a couple comments. And I'm thinking, well, what should you do? Wait till everyone's buying and there is no inventory and you're having to overpay? That quote by Warren Buffett, be greedy when people are fearful and fearful when people are greedy. Now is the time to be greedy because there are opportunities. And simultaneously, we're telling our sellers not to sell. So we're not telling everybody to be doing everything all at the same time. We're telling sellers to wait till the market is up so you can sell high, and if you're in a position to buy low, which is the maximum to make money or have efficiencies of your capital in any environment. And yet people always emotionally want to do the opposite. Such an interesting thing to watch play out, the emotionality versus rationality in these type of moments.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. To your point about now's the time to buy, and oftentimes this 5-year renewable mortgage deal that you guys got up there in Canada doesn't often sound so good. But if you reframe that, right, and say, well, listen, yeah, okay, it's 7.5, but it's only for 5 years. So yeah, you're going to have a higher payment, but it doesn't mean it's forever. And in fact, in all likelihood, again, we don't have a crystal ball, but in all likelihood, maybe in 5 years when you have to refinance here in Canada, it'll be at 5.5. So you may have to stretch your wallet a little bit, or make some decisions. And a lot of it is about decisions and choices. You may have to give up the car, or you may have to give up going out dining a little bit more. But if you can make it work now, chances are, in 5 years, your monthly payment's going to be less.
Well, all of the banks here and all of the economists have a consensus by mid 2024, rates will start to come down here because they work through the system so much quicker than in somewhere like the US where it takes a long time. So everyone is calling for rates to come down, and you can get a 1 year or 2 year or 3 year mortgage here. So if that's what you believe, or you see a strong case for that, knowing that it can't really get much higher, then what do you have to lose? And one of the things is, yes, going back to what you're saying, if you can afford to acquire the property, that's one thing. But the thing that's so interesting is affordability hasn't changed. So you could have bought a house at $1.7 million at 2% mortgage, or you could buy it today at 1.4 at a 6% mortgage. Your payments are almost the same. You're living in the same monthly payment. So if you see that and you understand, well, in 3 years from now, there's another 1.5 million people living in Toronto, or 1 million people living in Toronto, and they're not building any more houses. In fact, they're not building anything right now because everything is stopped. And you're like, well, if interest rates come down and I can refinance, there's a massive long-term opportunity right now. And people just need to get out of their own way and stop the doom scrolling and rationally look at these opportunities. There's tremendous opportunities, but it's all right here. Not
it almost feels like we've kind of come a little full circle with, getting out of the doomsday social media and choosing to listen to something like this that's more positive and has really some great ideas of, maybe that 6%, 7% mortgage doesn't feel right. And you're going to say, well, I'm going to just wait until it comes down. Getting educated or having someone, show them an example, whether it's literally doing some numbers for them, really does help a lot of folks, because there are a lot of folks that just are not number oriented, and they don't understand it. But if you can kind of put it out in plain English, I mean, what you're doing with this podcast and what other folks are doing is really where they should be listening and hearing this, because I think that's a great strategy to think about, buying something that maybe otherwise you would have felt was out of your reach, but now you might stretch a little, but it doesn't have to be forever.
I have a question for you both. Ralph, this is just to take a few steps back to what you said, and this is an opportunity for businesses and individuals and entrepreneurs to innovate, which I totally believe in. But can we just talk about what that could mean to the listeners? Innovate. People are always like, oh yeah, innovate. But what does that mean to you, Jim and Ralph, the word innovate? And can we just toss out some ideas so that we can give some tools or tangible ideas to the listeners today about what innovation could mean if you own a business?
Well, I'll jump in, and then Ralph, you can either, you might have different thoughts on it. I mean, innovate to me is thinking about, from a business point of view, of course, is new products, new markets, and it might be new technologies. So innovation during a downturn might be really, again, backing up a little bit, would be doing some industry research, doing some market research, which of course isn't always thought of or the most fun thing to do, but understanding where some gaps are in the market helps you. Market research could be as simple as surveying your existing customers. This product that you sell is, in a gallon jug. Would you prefer it in a 20-ounce package? Or would you prefer more flavors? Or, would you prefer other things? Maybe home delivery or different distribution method was something that wasn't on your radar, but now needs to be. Are there other technologies that your company hasn't adhered to because you haven't had to? So that might be, again, whether it's buying online or having a drone, deliver it right to your back deck. So that's innovation to me.
Yes.
And, one thing that sometimes is challenging for me is, unfortunately, we don't want to see a economic hardship be the only reason companies think about innovation, right? Which is often the case. It would be nice to think that innovation, continuous improvement is a ongoing practice in a business cycle. But if we stick to the subject during hard times, I think just looking at new products, new services, new technologies, and new markets feel like innovation to me. Ralph, what do you think?
I think it'd be a good time to hire a business coach or consultant for anyone who's watching. Small little plug there for you, Jim. But I think I'm just looking at my and Kori's experience when COVID hit, like that was a very big known unknown at the time. And
or
I
just an
remember,
unknown. I don't know if it was even known.
well, it was a known because there was a pandemic and a lockdown, but it was an unknown as to how long it would last or what the ramifications of it would be. A lot of people were at home baking bread and just started to almost capitulate. I remember Kori and I were like, okay, well, where is the opportunity? And the opportunity was to take the time to innovate and come out stronger than we were going into it, knowing that however long this would last, it wouldn't last forever, and that there were opportunities and gifts within that. And one of the things that we did that was so interesting is we started a Zoom podcast webinar before anybody was doing this. And the technology was just so new, and we would just put it out there to the world. We're going to talk about what's happening in the real estate market. We're going to give you the data real time before anybody else. And we would have
it was terrifying, by the way.
It was completely terrifying. Now we do one of these once a week and whatever. But mind you, this isn't live. That we were doing live.
Oh my God.
And we were having about 100 people on those calls. And we would, everyone was at home and nobody knew where to get real estate information. And so it was really, really an interesting thing that we did that nobody else was doing. And little did we know that it would turn into what we're doing on a weekly basis here on our YouTube channel and on Spotify. And it really sort of opened our eyes to how we can communicate truth in terms of what's happening versus what the media is saying, which is so sensationalized. So that little seed was born. And also through that time, we just took it as a great opportunity for business growth and self-improvement. Kori and I took a master's course from Harvard in negotiation. For anybody wondering out there, yes, we are both certified and distinguished alumni of online Harvard.
Mm-hmm. Online.
And then I took a business coaching course so I could be a better mentor to our team. And Kori took a marketing course. And all of the things that we did during that time period have served us and continue to serve us really, really well. And so that was a really interesting opportunity or period of innovation for us. And we're looking, not that we're going to go into it right now, but at innovating and starting other streams of revenue within our business and within what we do to help make our business and our cash flow stronger. And those are the things we might not have been looking at had we not been in a recessionary moment, because we would have just been going full guns ahead.
Well, one more I'd like to add to that is a very traditional business school management standby is the SWOT analysis, right?
Oh, I love the SWOT.
The SWOT analysis really provides an opportunity to drive innovative conversations, right? Combine the SWOT purpose with brainstorming, and you've got some seriously good stuff going on. Many small businesses that I've been working with, really aren't familiar with SWOT. They never, even if they knew what it was, they don't even do it. And it should be, again, part of their annual planning process is to really revisit their strengths and the opportunities. And it doesn't have to be, with an economic downturn. Again, this is something that we'd like to see being done in their normal annual business planning cycle. So it identifies opportunities, especially if you bring in, other folks that can provide some energy. You might have a SWOT meeting with including some customers, maybe some vendors, other stakeholders. If you have brainstorming sessions, those can be so not only fun, but really produce a lot of great ideas. So I think those, Kori, are feeders to innovative ideas.
I love that. And may I offer up one more idea? I was just thinking about this when you were both chatting, because I agree with what you both said. And I just was thinking about this. I think this is a really good opportunity for people to look at what they've been procrastinating doing because they've been afraid. And sometimes the things that you're most afraid of offer up the biggest rewards. And that's not only financially, but also emotionally, spiritually, in regards to fulfillment. And so I think this is a great time to ask the question, wow, I have more time on my hands than I'm used to because of the market shift. Let's just use as an example. What have I been putting off because I've told myself I don't have enough time to do it?
Mm.
But really, it's about I'm scared to approach it because I don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the answer to that question is likely an amazing way for you to innovate. So that could be, I've always wanted to do a custom website, but that just seems so overwhelming. I don't know where to start. This is an amazing time. I've always wanted to experiment with video, but that just seems so overwhelming. I can't do it, but this might be an amazing time. Or I've always wanted to start blogging or whatever it might be. The thing that you are most afraid of and you've been using time as your excuse, the answer to that is a great way to innovate. And I think that there will be reward on the other side if you can just be consistent with how you approach that over the next 4, 6, 9 months, per se.
Yeah, that's an excellent point of view on that, Kori. I think you're absolutely right. And when you talk about fear, it's kind of dovetails off what Ralph was talking about earlier. With I'm not going to buy a house. I'm afraid of the interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, again, talk about don't get focused on how you can't do it, but focus on how I can make it happen. Now, again, I know this is all easy for the three of us to chit chat about, and it's
yeah,
yeah, exactly. But it is, definitely understand different folks have different temperature levels of risk and what have you. So fear, but your point about fear, I think is extremely true. Not so easily overcome, but these things that you guys have just been talking about with introducing the Zoom meeting and having these platforms. This is where, in my opinion, social media shines. Where we should be taking advantage. How do they hear about your Zoom? I'm guessing through some kind of social media format. Whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever. So those are the really positives that I see with social media. It's going to be a challenge to get, other generations to stop thinking about social media on what benefit can I get out of the time I spend on social media rather than biased views and poor information and pop culture or, whatever, excuse my term, garbage is out there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you can say, I refuse to participate. I'd rather not spend my time on things that are not going to bring value to me in my life. And I'd rather spend time finding resources that we're talking about right here.
Well, it could be all about the perspective if it comes to social media as an opportunity to create content that's meaningful for you and your company. And the part about social media that I do enjoy is the fact that we can tell our own story there. And it's basically a free advertising tool that we can use limitlessly to share our point of view, to share valuable content to our audience, to experiment with video, to experiment with visual, and then to be like, what copy works, what copy doesn't work. I mean, it is an amazing creative tool to be able to tell your company or small business's story. And it can be very positive and very fulfilling if you do it in the right way and use it for that reason. And so this would be probably another way for companies to innovate right now, is another way.
It's amazing if you could talk to somebody 20 years ago and say, almost for no cost, you could have your own television station, your own radio station, and your own news outlet. And you, as an individual, as an entrepreneur, as a small business, could theoretically compete at next to no cost with the largest brands in the world.
That's true.
Like, what a leveler, And I think people get lost in that, in the negativity when they fail to see the opportunity. And as negative as we're talking about social media on one side, I mean, you could literally not go to college or university and educate yourself pretty much on any topic on
Absolutely.
YouTube. Like, wow, what a gift. You can't afford the $150,000 a year in the US tuition or $30,000 in Canada or whatever it is. You could literally learn any trade, anything. And one of the things that I'm very drawn to about YouTube or long form content is it's not memes. It's not somebody reposting somebody other. You're listening to people exchange ideas and their truth in long form and sometimes argue and challenge one another, or sometimes just continue to contribute and add to a theme. Like what a gift that is to have at your fingertips.
Absolutely.
So to be able to be a business, an entrepreneur, an individual, and participate in that on either side is pretty incredible at next to no cost.
Well said. Very true.
I always find that interesting. Okay, so getting back to the negativity now.
Please, let's not notice.
Yes.
So, question that I have, Canada basically went through 2008 unscathed. Our banking system this time was saved us from a lot of the turmoil that is now causing us to experience. So we really didn't go through much hardship on in any significant level. Even the housing market, it didn't even wince. While the US crashed, the whole housing market collapsed, we kind of flatlined and it got really quiet for about 6 months. And then we just started to do what we normally do in Toronto and shoot straight back up. What was it like in the US in 2007 and 8? What was it like as your experience? And what was it like for businesses back then in that environment? And how did companies deal with that? How did entrepreneurs deal with that? How did you deal with that? And how did people get through it? What was that like?
It wasn't pretty, Ralph. It wasn't pretty at all. From an investment, just think of the stock market alone. Whatever you had in financial assets, you were lucky if half of it was still there. In all likelihood, 30 or 40% is what you got, out of your financial assets. Your good majority of homeowners were now upside down. They didn't even know what upside down was, but then they learned what upside down was. It was really, really a horrible time. An example, I think it was embarrassing for, the banking industry, government regulation, all dropped the ball because of the shenanigans that were going on with, a freestyle applications. Your dead grandmother could get a mortgage back in 2006, which is horrible. So it was really, really, really bad. I mean, obviously, a lot of folks lost their homes. A lot of folks left the keys on the kitchen table and walked away. I mean, think about what,
Oh my gosh,
as culpable as the banks were, think about it now that they had millions of loans that people were just saying,
see ya.
I'm all set. Good luck. I'm out of here. I'm going to go rent an apartment someplace. So it was really devastating. How does that affect businesses? Well, now folks are challenged with, getting letters from their bank saying we need to, refinance. So we need to do this. And, people were losing jobs as a result of it. Companies were downsizing. Companies were literally closing the door. I mean, I personally had, many of the companies that I was working with not make it, unfortunately, and a lot did. And those were the companies that either had good financial management in place or were innovative or what have you. But in a word, it was pretty bad.
It's interesting because I remember looking at like the numbers of houses that were empty or being upside down in mortgages. Like the numbers were absolutely staggering. And it was like, how is the US ever going to recover from it? But it did. And historic terms, it did actually rather quickly, shockingly, by a lot of action by the government, but it did work through the system. But what's interesting that's happening here in Canada is the banks aren't forcing foreclosures. The banks are extending out amortizations. The banks, I think, watched what happened in 2008 in the US. And they're like, no matter what happens, we're going to try and work with homeowners and extend out and make sure that we're trying to slow down all the collateral damage that could come as a result of this. And so that hasn't happened here. But I do find it interesting how dire things were. But yet a couple years later, it was a very different scenario. And I'm sort of looking to that as a bit of an example as to what we're going through versus where I think and where I believe we're going to be in a year, maybe a year and a half from now.
Well, honestly, what we're talking about now really goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which was historical trends tend to be a good
Tend to be trends.
barometer to look at, right?
Mhm.
You're right. In 2008, it was dreadful. By 2010, kind of everything was back. Now, it wasn't perfect. Let's face it.
No, there is no perfect though.
Right. And we didn't have any other example to compare it to. Like Canada can learn from our mistakes in 2008. So you have an advantage. We didn't learn until it was too late,
Yeah.
how bad decisions were being made. It should provide some comfort that there is something on the other side, that's going to be okay.
Did you have any specific companies that you were working with or clients that really flourished during that time? Do you recall?
And I think this is my last question. What would you say are the common characteristics or threads over all the years for entrepreneurs to have the longevity and the success curve that they've had over their careers? Like, what commonality have you seen in their traits, their characteristics, their habits that have led to that ability to go through all seasons and continue to thrive?
Well, certainly one of them is, a well-known characteristic of entrepreneurship is passion, right? So, having passion for what you do, loving what you do, I think is the number one ingredient. I think another ingredient is, certainly being open to not having the "I'll do it myself" mentality, and being open to either other folks on your team or outside sources to help with the things that you don't excel at.
Kori, can put your hand down.
Certainly good, financial stewardship again, would be the ones that would stand out, as, having, more sustainability. Those that appreciate, planning and goal setting and metrics, to track how you're doing. So those are really the cornerstones. And of course, we know that obviously there's many business owners going back to that E-Myth mindset, not only the work on it versus in it, but the mindset that many entrepreneurs are technicians. So they don't really have the skills at all of these things. They can't. Let's face it. In most cases, technicians are really good at dentistry or cooking meals in a restaurant or, engineering. Doesn't mean that they have the skills at strategic planning and managing people and hiring the right people. So, understanding your strengths and weaknesses as a business owner and then acting on that, I think the ones that have sustained and maybe even gone into second and even third generations, are good leaders, good communicators, honest people that care for the people that, are in their employ. Those are some of the traits I think that stand out to me, Ralph.
Awesome. I think you encapsulated it perfectly.
I think you worked so well with us on that. And that was something that we took so much from our discussions, was really saying, like, what do we love about our roles in the business? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And then divide and conquering that versus us feeling like we had to be good at all aspects of it. And you know me very well, much more the technician, and Ralph much more the visionary. And then it was like such a relief to be like, oh my God, I don't have to be a leader. Like, I don't have to be this role that does not feel comfortable to me. I feel much more of somebody who loves spending their time on the creative side and the storytelling side and all the aspects that that I love about the business. And our audience may or may not know that as well. And it was like such a freedom to be like, focus on that then. Do what you're good at doing and then grow that. And then Ralph, you're really good at this and this is what you love. Focus on that. And that was such a big relief. That was huge. And then also, I think one of the exercises, when we talked about it briefly at the beginning of our hour together, was the exercise that you had us doing on time management, where we had to track in a spreadsheet how we spent our time. And it was so obvious to Ralph and myself that we spent so much time like driving from like one spot to another to do a task that was probably beneath our value. And how could we outsource all of this back and forth? Like, we'd be like driving across the city to drop off feature sheets, or driving across the city to go pick up keys, driving across the city to put in a lockbox. And I'm like, I've spent 4 hours in the car today, just basically being an in-house courier. And so I think that was a really helpful tool.
Yeah.
And we've just had so many great discussions. If there was a book or one book that stands out that you like to share with your clients as a resource in a time like this, does something stand out to you right away for a title? I know it's a hard one when somebody asks you for a book title.
Yeah, it changes. I don't want to say by the minute, but it's so funny that you talk about telling your story. One book that really is kind of more in the conversation with folks over the last few months is The Story Brand by Donald Miller.
Oh, yeah, such a good one.
It's a great book.
It's just so sensible, easy to understand.
Yes,
and really should remind people of what you can see it clearly what you're doing. You're talking about your services and all the great things that you do versus identifying things that are agitators for your prospects and identify those first. And then somewhere later on, you'll let them know that you can help them solve that. So that perspective, of course, there's many books, that I would come to mind, but this one comes to mind because it's kind of front and center right now with a handful of companies that I'm working with.
And I love in that book, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he's suggesting in that book that the customer is the hero.
Yeah, exactly. You got the right book.
That is such a good book. And then you're changing the narrative from being all about yourself as the business owner and as the entrepreneur. I feel like that word is so overused, entrepreneur. So I'm trying to avoid using it. So the business owner and the customer is your focus. They're the hero and you're there to solve their problem. And when Ralph and I read that book, we were like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Like, it was just like, and you're right. It's so simplistically written that anyone can understand it. And I think that would be an amazing tool for our viewers out there because it also encourages you to think about your business from that innovation standpoint. And this would be a really good way for you to be like, I have this time, or it is a really good time for me to be more creative or strategic or whatever it might be. And that I think is an excellent recommendation for that very reason.
To play on that point, turn off the social media a little bit more often and pick up a book.
Yes.
It still works, buy the book, put your feet up on the hassock and read. It still amazingly still works.
Awesome.
Ralph, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Jim, so glad you could join us on this conversation. I found it interesting and inspiring, and I really, really enjoyed it and saw value in it. And I hope everybody who's watching has as well.
Thank you so much, Jim, for being here today. As we wrap up with this episode, we would like to thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your great insights, your expertise in helping business owners work on their businesses rather than just be in them is always helpful to us and always has been helpful to us. And I hope it has been for our viewers today. Your guidance on identifying these blind spots and overcoming self-limiting beliefs and effective time management is always valuable. Thank you, viewers, today for tuning into the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. We dive deep into the challenges of economic downturns and uncertainty, and we hope you're leaving with valuable insights on navigating these times with resilience and some strategic thinking. Remember, even in uncertainty, there's always opportunities to grow and to succeed. Please join us next time for more empowering discussions to help you and your business thrive in this environment. Jim, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you. Hope you come and visit us again. Ralph, how do you always like to take us home?
Well, in this instance, I'll jump in on your behalf and say, contact us. We're nice. But if you've made it to the end of our podcast here, I just want to thank you for joining us on this journey today. Please be sure to smash that subscribe button down below, hit that like button. And if you have something constructive to say, we'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comment section.
And Jim, finally, if anyone wants to find more about Jim and his business, I will link up all of Jim's information in the show notes below for sure.
Well, thank you for having me, and always a pleasure to be with both of you. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.